And welcome to the February 18th, 2025 Eugene Planning Commission meeting. I'd like to call this meeting to order. My name is Jason Lear, and I'm chair of the Eugene Planning Commission. To begin this evening, I'd like to call on Commissioner Beeson for the city's land acknowledgement statement.
Thank you, Chair Lear. I'm actually Commissioner Ramey, but we'll get started.
I went through everybody.
I know this is a big letdown, probably. Since time immemorial, the Kalapuya people have been the indigenous stewards to our region, building dynamic communities, maintaining balance with wildlife, and enacting sustainable land practices. This land acknowledgement is a way of resisting the erasure of indigenous histories and to honor Native communities by inviting truth and reconciliation. Following treaties between 1851 and 1855, Kalapuya people were dispossessed of their indigenous homeland by the United States government and forcibly removed to the Coast Reservation in Western Oregon. As we consider the impacts of colonization, we also acknowledge the strength and resiliency of displaced indigenous people. The city of Eugene is built within the traditional homelands known as the Kalapuya Ilihai. Kalapuya descendants are citizens of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians of Oregon. They continue to make contributions in our communities here and across the lands. We express our respect for the inherent political sovereignty of all federally recognized tribal nations and indigenous people who live in the state of Oregon and across the nation. Therefore, the Planning Commission recognizes that what we do today will affect the many generations which come after us.
Thank you, Commissioner Ramey. Beautifully done. Thank you to everyone joining us in this virtual meeting format. This evening, we'll be continuing deliberations on an appeal of the hearing official's decision denying the Braywood Hills tentative planned unit development and tentative subdivision land use applications. Depending on our progress on deliberations and working through the remaining appeal issues, we may take final action on the appeal later this evening. As a reminder, the Planning Commission held a public hearing on January 14th, 2025, where interested parties had an opportunity to provide testimony on the appeal. Following the hearing, the record was closed and the Commission held the first deliberations meeting for this appeal on January 28th, 2025. Anyone wishing to join the meeting online can do so by following the instructions listed on the agenda for this meeting. Planning Commission meetings can also be viewed by watching the live stream available on our website. So now we're to the bulk of this, which is our work session, deliberations on the Braywood Hills land use appeal. During our initial deliberations on January 28th, we reviewed appeal issues 1 through 7 of the draft final order and took a series of straw poll votes, all of which were in support of staff's recommendations. Tonight, we'll continue reviewing the appeal issues, starting with appeal issues 8 through 10, and assuming that we get through the remaining appeal issues tonight, we'll then move on to taking formal action on this appeal. We'll start with a brief staff introduction on each appeal issue before the Commission begins deliberations on each individual topic. As we move through the topics, we'll conclude each one with a straw poll of commissioners before moving on to the next item. Unless there are any initial questions, I'll hand it over to Nick Gioiello for a brief introduction. Then we'll start on appeal issue 8. Nick.
Thank you, Chairman and Commissioners. I'm going to share my screen here. And I'm going to alert everyone that I'll be talking, but at the end, if there's any questions that come up or anything, I have hearing aids with a listening device plugged into the computer. There's sometimes a 4 or 5 second delay, and I may have to ask you to repeat something. So I apologize up front if that happens. Again, for everybody's knowledge, I'm Nick Gioiello, Associate Planner with the city. Also here tonight is Assistant City Attorney Lauren Sommers and Principal Planner Gabe Flock. They're available for questions and clarifications and to add all the incredible insights that they both have about the intricacies of these appeal issues and the site itself. So we are here for the Braywood Hills 3rd edition appeal for the tentative plan unit development and tentative subdivision. And I'm still having the same issue with the slides not wanting to advance. There we go. Real quick, the vicinity and zoning map outlining the site here, and Hawkins Lane that comes down and provides the primary access to this area. Well, we've referred to Randy Lane. There is a constructed portion of Randy Lane already existing and is right here. Blackdale Drive right here, and we've talked about this intersection at times. And Randy Lane also, this side that is constructed, it ends as a stub right here at the southeast portion of the property. And again, just for everyone's clarification and understanding, here is the site and the proposed lots that the applicant submitted as part of their application. And you'll see again here, this is Hawkins Lane, Randy Lane, Blackdale coming down here. The extension of Randy Lane that's talked about as part of one of the appeal issues is this area right through here that ends with a turnaround. And then the southeast portion where Randy Lane continues over here. And the infamous lot 39 that we'll also be discussing tonight is right here. As well as you can see in some of these blue areas, some of the wetlands. You can also see other outlines of unprotected wetlands here and here and here. And then the stream corridor that is protected that comes down across the property here, and the boundary for the protection here in purple. Chairman already kind of went over this. So yeah, we had a hearing on the 14th. We also had deliberations on the 28th. And in those deliberations, we looked at the testimony that was submitted, and there was also agreement as to if any testimony was to be rejected or portions of testimony rejected. And we went over all that in that meeting, as well as appeal items 1 through 7. And tonight we will go through, and hopefully we can finish the last 3, eventually get to a final action. And I'm going to go through these real quick. So appeal issue number 1 was the hearings official erred by rejecting the rebuttal evidence that the applicant had submitted during the second open record period. The appellant basically asserts that they responded to the information that we placed into the record in the first open record period, where we changed some of the things that we had in the staff report, particularly things to do with stormwater and Randy Lane being a public street versus the private street that they had proposed. The chairman indicated that there were straw polls on that date, and the opinion was to reverse the hearings official decision and to consider all the evidence that was submitted by the applicant in the second open record period as being responsive to everything already in the record. The second appeal issue was about whether the site is in its entirety is a Goal 5 resource site, particularly as it's located on the scenic sites working paper figure H2, and therefore the tree preservation standards referenced in 9.8325 would not apply, and the hearings official had erred by denying the applicant's application. Part of what was behind that was the hearings official could not determine if figure H2 was actually acknowledged as part of the Goal 5 resources back when the ordinance was put in place and we established our maps and our language about Goal 5 resources. And so she felt she couldn't make a decision on this issue. Again, as we went through this issue, the determination, or at least I don't want to call it a determination, actually. I want to say that what you came up with was to reverse the hearings official decision on this issue and find that figure H2 is a document that forms the city's acknowledged Goal 5 inventory, and that the entire site is Goal 5 and is therefore exempt from tree preservation and removal standards. Issue number 3, the hearings official erred when making a finding of compliance with the secondary emergency access standard on a condition prohibiting any parking on the streets with 21-foot paving. This was in response to some fire comments that came in talking about street widths and what they desired. And as we had indicated in our staff report, fire department regulations are not administered through our Eugene code. They're administered by the fire marshal, and those things can be implemented during the time of building permit, which they typically are. You determined that to modify the hearing's official decision. Here I said determined again, I apologize. The opinion was, how's that sound? The opinion was that it should modify the hearing's official decision and find that the site does comply with secondary emergency access standards, and that the parking prohibition condition on the private streets is not needed. Appeal issue 4 was that the hearing's official erred by not considering, again, the evidence submitted on August 14th during the second open record period, rebutting Public Works evidence that the applicant had not justified an exception allowed under EC 9.68152H, and that was the connection to Randy Lane. I don't think I need to explain that one anymore. The opinion being during that meeting was that you should modify the hearing's official decision and find the evidence submitted was responsive and demonstrates that an exception under the street connectivity standards in 9.68152H was met. And that's to deal with the excessive slopes in the area. Appeal issues 5 and 6 were so closely related, we considered them as one appeal issue. The applicant argued that the hearing's official erred in concluding there's a failure to show no need for the extension of Randy Lane to be developed to public road standards. The applicant also argued that the hearing's official erroneously rejected the applicant's argument that demand for public stub is not justified under constitutional law standards. And that was in direct response to, during the first open record period, we revised our referral, the Public Works revised the referral comments and talked about we need to have Randy Lane as a public road, not a private road. It means that the road will be a little bit wider and have other improvements such as sidewalk and street trees and street lights, things like that. And that it benefited the public to do so, and that there were constitutional findings that could be made to justify that. The opinion was during the deliberations hearing that you uphold the hearing's official decision and modify finding that Randy Lane should be a public street with conditions of approval. And we revised those conditions, and they're at the end of the final order that we supplied to you, the draft final order. And then appeal issue 7 was that the applicant argued that the hearing's official erred in requiring compliance with the requirements for geotechnical certification due to the applicant's failure to carry its proof that the site is included in the city's Goal 5 inventory. Again, this ties back to the other appeal issue about whether the entire site is Goal 5 or not. And if it is Goal 5, there's clear language in the code that exempts it from the geotechnical requirements. At this stage, although geotechnical requirements will be asserted during the building permit phase for any buildings that go on the site. The opinion was at the deliberation hearing that you modify the hearing's official decision and find that figure H2, again, is a document that forms the city's Goal 5 inventory. I don't think I need to read the rest of that. I think everybody's got it. So let's move on to the last 3. So I'm going to start with appeal issue 8. And this one is that the applicant argues that the hearing's official erred by not finding that the proposed stormwater system can comply with the city standards for stormwater, even if the system must be adjusted in the event Randy Lane must be a public road. What the hearing's official found was that because Randy Lane should be public, additional stormwater requirements for redesign were not met with the information supplied. And that related to rejecting the applicant's evidence that was submitted in the second open record period, which we now have consensus should be allowed and then can be considered. So now you can make the findings that the stormwater system can accommodate the additional requirements that are triggered when it changed from a private road to a public road. And what I mean there is when it's a private road, it's a little bit narrower, has less things about it that trigger a smaller stormwater retention. Or is it retention or detention? I can't remember now. We had this discussion with Gabe earlier. But when you do a public road, it triggers additional requirements, and so your facility has to be upsized to meet those requirements. And so what we're saying is, with the evidence they submitted in stormwater memo in the second open record period that you've now discussed, allowing as evidence, that we've got some additional conditions that will guarantee that that you can find that they meet the requirements in 9.6791 through 6797 and can be met with a condition for redesigning prior to final plat. The other thing to remember with tentative PUDs and tentative subdivisions, which may not be completely evident in the language we've got in both the AIS and the final draft order, is that at this stage in all the other ones that we deal with, everything's at a conceptual level. I just wanted to make that clear. Your stormwater design is at a conceptual level. You don't know all the details yet, but what we're doing is looking at what they're proposing, what they're saying. It's going to be approximately this size, and we look at it conceptually and say, yes, it can be met. And then we actually have put in language into our decisions that talk about, and further, you'll be able to make additional adjustments to it to meet the correct standards at the time of building permit or at the time of a PEPI permit. We did that in Laurel Ridge. We did that in the Jessamine Ponds over on Highway 99. We do that in all of these that are at conceptual level. So we're not doing anything unusual here. I'm not sure if that gets across in how we've written it. What I'm specifically talking about here is this is the extension of Randy Lane, as we see here in the wood end. This is when it was the applicant's design as a private road. So it ends up becoming a little bit wider, a little more right of way. The detention facility they showed at that larger and have to go somewhere either here or up in here somewhere. They'll have to, and what we believe is based on what we know with these design capabilities, they'll be able to do it. We just will get more of that detail when we get to the next stage. So the other thing to consider is that the private roads and the private driveways that will also connect to the private street can also be added to this public facility, and that we've put that in the new revised conditions that you'll see at the end of the final draft that deal with this. So, yeah, I think at this point, I think I can't remember how we did this in the past. It's been a month, but I think at this point we want to start a discussion on this issue. And I'll turn it over.
Thanks, Nick. Does anyone have any questions or comments about this appeal issue? Doesn't look like it. And obviously, Lauren, you've got some questions.
Thank you, Chair Lear. It's not a question, it's more of a clarifying comment to Nick's comments about the PUD being somewhat conceptual in nature and then things sort of iterating as development occurs. I want to be clear that what staff is recommending in the decision that is proposed for Planning Commission is not to put off compliance with the applicable approval criteria until building permit. The staff's recommended conditions would ensure that the PUD plan right now complies with the applicable approval criteria, and at subsequent development stages, so for example, development permits, building permits, the PEPI permits for the road, those also have to meet the stormwater standards. So we're not waiting until later to comply. The decision that's being presented to you would find that the applicant complies now for the overall PUD plan, and that when we have more detail in later stages, those developments will need to comply as well.
Commissioner Isaacson.
So just to clarify, so staff recommendation is that prior to the final PUD approval, the applicant would have to have submitted an updated storm drainage memorandum that complies with EC 9761. Am I getting that correct?
It's close. I'll let Gabe or Nick jump in, but I believe that the condition is that the applicant will need to submit an updated site plan, not just a memorandum, that includes the two conditions as notes on the site plan,
Right.
so that it's clear. Yeah, and I'll turn it over to you, Gabe.
Sure. No, happy to try to provide a little more clarity there. So I think the way we crafted these conditions, Commissioner Isaacson, was to take it to the next level of specificity, right? Rather than, the initial response was, hey, we don't have enough information if they change the design to a public street, so please provide that analysis. In the evolution of this through the open record period, and since the applicant did submit responsive evidence doing at least some of that work to respond and how Randy Lane and they would accommodate the stormwater from the public street change, if you will. So some of that information was provided in their engineer's analysis. So what this does is effectively lock them into certain assumptions and require them to design it according to those assumptions, which are kind of baked into the language that will be the condition of approval. So we'll have an updated site plan with the notes, making sure that they're obligated at the time of permit to do the analysis that they need to prove the design meets the standard at each stage, right? Sort of
straightforward.
Yeah, locking it up. Yeah.
Thank you.
I had a question. I didn't want to get too complex with it, but just kind of thinking about some of the things that were in discussion last week, and just so I can kind of better understand, or at our last meeting, I should say, how is weight placed in the law in analyzing the benefit of making a street public in this case versus the additional cost that would be imposed? What's sort of the way that that's looked at or calculated, or is it even?
It is, and there are kind of two pieces to that analysis. I can speak to part of it, and then I'll look to maybe Gabe and Nick to speak to some of the city's policy decisions around why the city has a preference that's expressed as approval criteria in the code for public streets over private streets under certain circumstances. But in terms of the sort of burden on the property owner, developers, compared to the benefit to the public of having a public street, the city does do a takings analysis, and you considered that in your deliberations last week as part of some of those appeal issues, where the city has to show, a nexus and Gabe, help me. Do you remember that? There are specific legal terms, but basically we're looking for the fact that there's enough new use of the infrastructure of the street system by the folks that will be living in this new development to support requiring the developer to pay to build the public road system. And the city did make those findings, and the hearings official did find that they met that constitutional threshold. And per your straw poll at the last meeting, Planning Commission found the same.
And just a little bit of a follow-up question on that. So does that change at all, say, in light of the presentations that we've had recently on housing need, or would that factor into that determination, or would it have factored into, say, that previous set of numbers at the time that the city made its determination?
Previous set of numbers? You mean like the new ONA numbers?
Yeah, the new ONA numbers versus the old calculation.
I would say generally no. The constitutional requirement remains the same, and it's really based on the use of that particular infrastructure system, and the new folks that are moving in and will be adding more trips on the road, more need for sidewalks, et cetera, when you're talking about small infill development, it's harder to make those findings often because there aren't as many folks moving in. So there's a correlation with some of the new housing types that we're seeing more frequently. But here, it's a big development. There will be a number of people living there. And that, like I said, the city did those constitutional calculations, made the findings. The hearings official determined that they were adequate, and at least by straw poll, so did you.
Commissioner Bailey?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
What, can you say a little more about in your conditions, the meaning of having runoff from private facilities combined with runoff from the public street? And Nick briefly mentioned this in terms of the driveways or something. In what way is it combined and what does that impact?
I'd be happy to jump in here, Nick, if that works.
Yeah.
Right. So one of the distinctions between public and private stormwater facilities in our code, which I think this hinges on, is the fact that if an applicant proposes a public detention facility, the code expressly allows them to add, to incorporate, to encompass, take on water, stormwater runoff from additional private facilities, including shared driveways and private streets. So, partly based on some of the testimony we heard and this concern about it being kind of a disjointed, hey, permit by permit kind of a look, the applicant seeming to agree and, with this public detention approach, now under code has the ability to size it to accommodate that additional runoff. And so on the one hand, it provides some flexibility. They could choose to do individual detention basins for private facilities or some combination of private and public. On the whole, it needs to accommodate the assumed runoff from all of it, right? But so what it essentially means is they can capture some of that private stormwater runoff in a bigger detention basin that's within the public street.
Any other questions on this topic? Okay, do we want to take a straw poll? Let's try to organize this. Someone want to paraphrase what we're doing on this one? Maybe Lauren or Gabe or Nick. What their staff recommendation is what I'm looking for.
Oh.
Yeah, let's go back.
Do it.
I would so it would be to find that the requirements of EC 9.6791 through 96797 can be met with conditions for redesigning prior to final plat. And then I think it was condition 27 where we put that in. Is that correct?
But on page 24 here.
8 minutes to find.
Yeah, I think that was.
Okay, here it is.
Yeah.
Commission hereby modifies the hearing official's decision and finds the requirements of EC 96791 through 96797 can be met as condition. The applicant has demonstrated the system can be adjusted to accommodate the increment of stormwater from the required public road. It's on the top of page 28, I think. So all of those, and this is a straw poll at this point still, who are in favor of that finding, please raise your hand. And that looks like everybody in attendance, so we can move on to the next issue. Maybe kick it back to you, Nick, if you want to review Appeal Issue 9.
Yeah, we're going to get that ready. Here we go. And okay, so appeal issue number 9 is that the applicant argues that the hearings official erred by finding that because almost all of proposed lot 39 is above 901 feet, the land comprising proposed lot 39 did not exist as a separate lot on August 1st, 2001, and the applicant is prohibited for further development on that lot. And what that's referring to is the specific code language and the clear and objective criteria about that issue about August 1st, 2001. The hearings official found that no development should be allowed on lot 39 above 901 feet because it didn't exist as a separate lot prior to that date in 2001. We're recommending that you uphold and modify the decision, no development above 901 feet, with a condition of approval that we've also included. And I have to pull up another document to remember where that was. Anyway, I want to, I'll find that in a minute, but I wanted to, if I can get to the next slide, hopefully, there we go. So what we're talking about is this lot right here. As you can see, in their proposal, they showed 4 middle housing lots on lot 39, and then it comes down to here. It comes, and you can see the black dashed line right through here. The red line that you see here is the 901 foot elevation. So there is a tiny sliver, a couple of areas right here that are below 901 feet, but not effectively able to develop anything below 901 feet. So if there's more discussion about this, I'm certain that Lauren can weigh in and talk about the issues, because a lot of this stuff comes out of LUBA, but I will leave it here and then I'll find that condition and we can reference which condition it was.
Lauren, did you have some stuff to add on that?
Sure. So the commission might remember that this appeal issue was the subject of a fair amount of the applicant's commentary in the public hearing. So I wanted to kind of take a step back and give the commission the city's analysis of how the clear and objective PUD criteria kind of fit with the middle housing statute and administrative rules adopted by the Land Conservation and Development Commission. So, as you know, this particular piece of property is subject to plan unit development overlay, which is why we're talking about a plan unit development application right now. The applicant is required to submit a PUD application. As the commission also well knows, there are 2 kind of approval tracks available to a PUD applicant: a general, more subjective track, where the criteria tend to be more flexible, but also more subjective. There's opportunity to sort of disagree about what is specifically required to meet the criteria. And then a clear and objective track, wherein the criteria are clear and objective. An applicant should know exactly what they need to do to meet those criteria. Here, the applicant chose to proceed under the clear and objective track. When a piece of property, as this one is within the boundaries of the South Hills study, which, as the commission will remember, is a refinement plan that encompasses a lot of the property sort of south of 18th and up to the ridgeline within the city. And it's one of its kind of major goals of that refinement plan is protection of the ridgeline area. It was adopted a long time ago, so part of it was protection to allow the city to build the Ridgeline Trail, and then also protection of the viewshed, kind of what it looks like on the top of the ridgeline. So if a property is within the South Hill study area, then they have to comply with additional PUD criteria, which are intended to implement the South Hill study and in large part to protect the viewshed. And the South Hills study generally discourages development above 901 feet, again, to protect that ridgeline area and to protect the viewshed, but it doesn't outright prohibit it. So the general track approval criteria just sort of point back to compliance with the refinement plan, and the refinement plan says shouldn't have an intensive level of development above 901 feet, but it doesn't outright prohibit development above 901 feet. On the other hand, but under the general track, you'd have to make a case for why the development being proposed isn't intensive, kind of go through these subjective criteria, but development above 901 feet theoretically is possible under the general track. For the clear and objective track, when the city was trying to develop clear and objective criteria, we kind of had to say yes or no. And so the clear and objective criteria say, look, no development above 901 feet, no single family dwellings, no middle housing, no roads, no development of any kind above 901 feet unless the lot was in existence on August 1st, 2001, which is kind of a random date. That was the date that the updated land use code was adopted. So that's why we're talking about 2001. And so the lot had to be in existence as of August 1, 2001. And even then, you're only allowed one single unit dwelling or middle housing. It was updated to allow for middle housing when we did our middle housing ordinance. So in this case, we've got lot 39, which everyone agrees did not exist as of August 1st, 2001. That's what the hearings official found. The applicant doesn't dispute that. And so no development is allowed above 900 feet. In this case, all of the above 900 feet on this subject property is located on lot 39. So that's kind of our code provision, right? No development above 900 feet, therefore no development on the majority of lot 39 because it didn't exist on August 1st, 2001. Then separately, the middle housing statutes say cities have to allow middle housing on properties that are zoned for residential use and allow for the development of single family dwellings. And so what I understand the applicant to be arguing is, well, the property is zoned, the base zone is R1. That clearly allows residential uses, and the R1 zone without the PD overlay would allow for development of a single unit dwelling. So therefore, the applicant should be allowed to develop middle housing. That is not how the city reads that statute. And it's also not how the Land Conservation and Development Commission reads that statute. So the way that the city understands that statute, the way the hearings official understood the statute is two things have to be true. The property has to be zoned for residential use, which is true here. And you have to be able to build a single unit dwelling, a detached single unit dwelling on the property. And because all of lot 39 is located above 901 feet, an applicant could not build a detached single family dwelling on lot 39. So they also cannot build middle housing on lot 39. And the administrative rules adopted by the Land Conservation and Development Commission, I think, are even a little bit more clear than the statutory language. They clearly say that the middle housing laws and rules don't apply to lots and parcels that are zoned for residential use, but do not allow for the development of a detached single family dwelling. So I don't think, and that is the situation here. Zone for residential use does not allow for the development of a detached single family dwelling. So staff is proposing a condition that just says, hey, no development above 901 feet. So it's really clear to everyone, including the applicant and potentially future owners of the property, that no development is allowed. Our code doesn't allow for it. That is true for this application, but it doesn't prohibit a future owner from coming back and filing a new PUD application, maybe proceeding under the general track, which might allow some development above 901 feet. Choosing a different track and choosing different approval criteria. It doesn't prohibit all development forever. It prohibits development on lot 39 under this PUD application because of the clear and objective approval criterion that are being applied here. I guess the Commissioner Isaacson, I see your hand, and I'll just say one more thing, which is Mr. Close spoke a fair bit at the public hearing about the PGE analysis and saying that he didn't think that the city had done a PGE analysis. And I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about what that means. So PGE versus Boley is a Oregon Supreme Court case that's been around for a long time. And it basically talks about how the Oregon courts interpret statutory language. So if a statute is not clear, they look at the text of the statute first. So what does it say on its face? The context, which is other statutes on the same topic or administrative rules, and then the legislative history. So if there's anything in the legislative record that would show that this is what the legislature meant when they adopted this statute. The city has done that analysis. That's kind of what we just did that I walked you through, where we looked at the text of the statute itself. What does it say? The context of the statute, including the administrative rules, which I would argue are very clear. And then as far as legislative history on this particular question, the applicant hasn't really pointed to any that's helpful in either direction, helpful in kind of shoring up the applicant's argument or in the city's argument. I don't think that I'm not aware of any legislative history that goes to this specific question. So that is the PGE analysis. And it's true that like the hearings official's decision and staff's reports haven't used the term PGE analysis. It has been done. And that is what has led to staff's recommendation to the Planning Commission on this appeal issue. So thank you.
Commissioner Isaacson, I might jump in after you.
I always love Lauren's breakdowns because they do a really great job of breaking it down for all of us. I was just hoping that maybe staff could check my algebra on my notes. That this particular appeal issue came in at 3 points. Is the tentative subdivision application truly independent, or does it require PUD approval for it to proceed? Should the Planning Commission establish a new precedent requiring separate findings for subdivisions when they're linked to a PUD? And would a separate analysis have changed the outcome, or was a subdivision inherently tied to the PUD's fate? Is that?
So that Commissioner Isaacson, that's actually the next appeal issue. That's appeal issue 10.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit relevant in that we are talking about approval criteria for the PUD, which are then move into the subdivision. But that's what we're talking about right now specifically is appeal issue 9, which has to do with Lot 39, and then we'll move to the discussion of appeal issue 10 after, if that works for you.
That's fine.
I'll let Gabe jump in as well.
Oh, only to say that I think the applicant chose, and it's a fairly recent addition or change to the code based on clear and objective update, 2019-ish or so, that an applicant can actually have a tentative subdivision reviewed at the same time as a tentative PUD. That didn't used to be the case, but as Lauren explains, we'll talk about that, the intricacies of that interrelationship. Fact is each application truly needs to stand on its own in terms of meeting the criteria and the approval for that. And so when we get to that question, I think it's a fair one to say, hey, is there enough in the subdivision?
Precedent. Yeah. It's getting a cart before the horse. Excuse me.
It's all right.
Well, Lauren, when you were walking through sort of the arguments that Mr. Close made, you did such a good job. You kind of got me thinking about it a little bit more. So I just wanted to make sure that I'm fully understanding. So under the general track, as opposed to the clear, and you'll have to correct me if I use the wrong jargon, but was it clear and convincing, or what's the other track?
Objective. I like
objective track. Yeah. So under the general track, it may be possible to build a single family home above 901 square feet in this subdivision if it's not intensive. That's kind of the standard. Did I get that right, or was I mistaken?
Yeah, I think Gabe has more experience with applying that criterion than I do, but
so the the word intensive is born out of the South Hills study. Essentially, when you get into a category of discretionary review for a PUD over 900 feet, there are additional approval criteria, subjective ones, that require a variety of things, like maximizing preservation of existing vegetation, like minimizing impact on steep slopes, clustering development to lowest elevations with least visual impact, things of that nature, right? And so it's not to say that they could only do one house. They could propose, any number of dwelling units that could also, in theory, meet those subjective criteria. So it's a completely separate test, different approval criteria are more subjective, but it would enable, that kind of a subjective review for what level of intensity is appropriate at that elevation.
But I guess is it fair to say that under the circumstances described, that single family homes can be built above 901 feet?
Yes.
If the applicant had chosen the other approval criteria track.
Sure, and I guess whether or not they could have been approved for that, I guess maybe is a little different question than trying to interpret that state law as it requires that any zone in which single family housing is allowed. I was kind of a little hung up when Mr. Close was talking about, but it doesn't necessarily specify in the law that on any lot that it's allowed. But I guess I was under the impression that it would not be allowed to build single family homes above 901 square feet. So I'm still, I guess, just a little confused.
Yeah. Your questions are good, Commissioner Lear. It comes down to, in this case, I think the applicant's choice. So under the clear and objective approval criteria, because the city just kind of had to draw a line somewhere and say, okay, to make it clear and objective, the choice was, we'll just say nothing is allowed above 901 feet, unless you had a lot that was previously in existence, which isn't true here, right? Or we have the general track that might allow it, maybe, but you have to kind of go through the process of creating a proposal showing that you can comply with all of those general track approval criteria. The applicant chose the clear and objective track, and that is their right. But as part of that choice, it was clearly and objectively one of the approval criteria that no development would be allowed on lot 39, or at least the portions of lot 39 above 901 feet, because it didn't exist on August 1st, 2001. So anyone proposing to develop that property under the clear and objective approval criteria could not develop that lot. They couldn't develop it with the road, they couldn't develop it with a single family home, and they can't develop it with middle housing.
Does it run afoul at all of middle housing law and that clear objective criteria that one track can't allow something and one track explicitly outlaws it? That dichotomy kind of confuses me a little bit.
No, I would say no, because the LUBA and it went to the Court of Appeals. I can't remember if there was an opinion or if it was just affirmed by the Court of Appeals, but LUBA at least has been really clear that clear and objective criteria don't have to equate to an approval or an approval of what the applicant would like to build on a particular site. You just, clear and objective criteria just have to be clear and objective. You have to know as an applicant coming in whether you can meet them or not, but they don't have to necessarily create the conditions for allowing an applicant to develop whatever it is they want on a piece of property. The city has tried to kind of create those possibilities by having both a clear and objective track and a subjective track, the general track, so that if an applicant really wants to do a thing that they couldn't do under the clear and objective track, then maybe they can do it under the general track. The law actually only requires the city to have clear and objective approval criteria. We could say that's all we're going to offer, but Eugene wants to kind of support creativity, wants to support allowance of other development types, and so has decided to offer those dual tracks, one that offers a lot of certainty and one that offers more flexibility. In this case, the applicant chose certainty, which means no development above 901 feet, not single unit detached, not middle housing, not anything.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. Commissioner Bailing?
So I would like another clarification also. The condition of approval, number 21, is the one that states there should be the final PUD plans have to remove all references to middle housing lots created on land above 901-foot elevation, and also include a note stating no development may occur on any land above 901 feet in elevation. And that relates, I assume, to this entire subdivision, which includes lot 39, does it not?
Yes, but lot 39 is, and Nick and Gabe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is lot 39 is the only area of the PUD that has property above 901 feet. So it doesn't affect any of the other lots.
If I understand what you're saying, that doesn't necessarily stand forever going forward. If whoever owns it sells it off to somebody else and then they want to develop it under general criteria, they could build.
They would have to submit a new application. They would have to go through this process again. Yeah.
Okay.
And have to apply anew under the discretionary track in order to effectively get past that limitation.
Anyone else have any comments or thoughts or questions about this one? Commissioner Beeson?
Yeah, this is a comment. When we did middle housing, I have to say when I struggled with this one quite a bit, and I think a lot of it's come clear for me just recently, and certainly with the discussion that Lauren had tonight, and you should get an award for that, of explaining all of that to us that way. I came out of middle housing with the idea that wherever there was land zoned R1, which allowed for single unit development, you could have middle housing. And then I think as we came into this, I was just having a bit of a struggle. And then the idea that, as you guys have talked about it, what really distinguishes this under the clear and objective track. Well, before I say that, you also, I guess, to develop the middle housing, it has to be in a place where you could, in fact, build a single unit dwelling. And I will say, I didn't really quite get that like 2 months ago, or that's not something I was sitting around thinking about and making that connection. So, and then the idea that on the clear and objective track, it doesn't allow for any of that any development above 900 feet unless it's on a lot, given that the date requirement that you have. So I think at this point it's kind of making sense to me. And I appreciate Commissioner Bailing's kind of a clarification. I suppose if somebody comes along at some point and buys lot 39, decides to go through the process again and do it on the general track, maybe they could develop up there. So anyway, just a comment.
Okay, if nothing else, we can take a straw poll, and let me find the language here. Well, it's pretty long, but I think it starts here, kind of midpoint of page 29, and that the planning commission affirms the hearing officials finding that the approval criteria of EC 9.83258 prohibits all development above 901 feet on lot 39 because it did not exist as a separate lot on August 1st, 2001. And then there's some additional description there. So all those who are in favor of ratifying that staff recommendation in our straw poll, you can raise your hand. We've got everybody voting in favor of that. And so that brings us to appeal issue number 10. Nick?
Thank you. Get to the next slide first before I share. There we go. Everyone can see that. Okay. Appeal issue number 10 is that the applicant argues that the hearings official erred by not doing a separate review of the subdivision proposal, relying instead on the analysis of the PUD. The hearings official found that PUD criteria is substantially the same as the subdivision criteria and can rely on findings, and you can rely on the findings in the PUD to review the subdivision. The hearings official decision was a denial, though, based on the PUD criteria, and therefore the subdivision was denied. And specifically, as she mentioned in her decision about the issue about goal 5 and how it, she couldn't determine whether it was entirely goal 5 or not, you know, the site, as we've talked about. And it also impacted several of the other appeal issues about geotechnical report and about tree preservation. That was the reason to deny, although she did talk about how the subdivision criteria was analyzed and was shown to meet. And so specifically what we're talking about is in our staff report back in that time that the hearings official relied on, where I don't know, 95% of the criteria is identical. It'll be all the stormwater standards that are listed, and the subdivision will list the same stormwater standards, or the vision clearance area, or the streets and sidewalks and how they're constructed. We would say things like, as detailed in this section in the PUD, and it was found to be in compliance, therefore it is in compliance when we're looking at it in the subdivision section. We said something in essence like that, and then she relied on that to say, well, it was demonstrated and met all the criteria except for these areas where I couldn't find compliance. And so that's what this issue is about. And I think the applicant wanted to do a full-blown analysis that would have regurgitated the same exact language and just stuck it into the subdivision criteria, as we typically do not elect to do that. And because it just duplicates everything. It doesn't make sense. So what we're recommending is that you uphold the hearings official decision, and you find that you can rely on the PUD criteria for the subdivision. It's valid if it met the PUD criteria. It's exactly the same as what's listed in the subdivision. You should be able to rely on that. What we're also saying, though, is that you do modify her decision, because as you've talked about, you're going to allow the evidence be in the record that lets you make the findings on the stormwater, let you make the findings that the road can be public, let you make the findings that the geotechnical requirement is exempt at this stage, comes in later at building permit, tree preservation is exempt at this stage, and that you can find that the subdivision standards and the criteria have been met. I will stop sharing.
Okay, does anyone have any comments, or are we going to revisit Commissioner Isaacson's question from the previous round? Looks like nobody else at the moment. Commissioner Isaacson, do you want to refresh on your question?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing is for me is if we have a separate analysis and we say, look, they wouldn't have been different, but we're setting the precedent that we're not going to require a separate analysis. What if in the future it is, right? So I'm a little setting precedent to say like we don't need a separate one. They're going to be identical how we run it. It's just duplicative. That I'm struggling with. I don't have a problem saying to precedent if it makes things easier and helps the process, but someone just has to walk me through that issue. I know Gabe will.
I'll do my best. And I started to earlier, but right. So fairly recent change that we have concurrent review of a tentative PUD and a tentative subdivision allowed at the same time. Previous to the clear and objective update, they were sort of, you had to do the tentative PUD first, and then the subdivision would bring in more detail and presumably more design and all that. To the extent that they are, as Nick describes, virtually identical, and to the extent that we have made findings that suffice for both sets of identical criteria, it's regular practice for staff to write, if we have multiple concurrent applications that have redundant criteria, to do what we call by incorporating those findings by reference, right? The issue, and I think the facts and circumstances in this case are a little bit unique, and I can't always predict, well, what's the scope of potential future precedent, but there's some fairly unique issues in any given appeal. These, in the hearings official's decision, were specific to certain criteria, like failure to comply with the criterion about Goal 5 tree preservation or the geotech. Nick listed the ones. And so to the extent that the Planning Commission has reversed and modified her decision and instituted conditions of approval to change that decision, we have what we believe are all the findings necessary to also demonstrate compliance with the subdivision. So we believe it's all there. And if there were a future circumstance that I'm imagining, right, in which case there were different evidentiary issues or things that would require us to do additional findings on the subdivision, we would probably have a different answer for you. In this case, they're so sort of locked together, and we think we have the sufficient findings and evidence and conditions all based on the outcome of the Planning Commission's determination. Presuming you get there and agree to and approve this final order, we think we have all what we need to defend this on appeal for both applications.
That's essentially the kind of same thing I was thinking. I wanted to hear your thoughts on it.
Okay. Happy to share that.
Any other deliberations, questions, or comments before we take a straw poll and then potentially move on to approving or taking some other action on this draft order? Not seeing any, so all support the staff's recommendation on this appeal, issue number 10. If you could raise your hand right now. And we are all unanimous tonight in reviewing these final issues. So, though there were a few that were a little bit closer than others, it seems like we've all paid really close attention and tried our best to analyze these complex issues. And I certainly feel comfortable, unless anyone else doesn't, in moving forward to discuss and vote on the staff recommendation. And do we want to review that once more, or I know we've gone over it quite a bit. Is it necessary for us to review it again, Lauren?
It's not. So you have the proposed draft final order in your packet for tonight. If commission is inclined to approve it, then I can give you a motion to do that. And then staff will reach out to you, Chair Lear, to sign it. If that assumes that commission is happy with the final order, that there aren't any like small wording changes that you want to make or anything like that. If there are, we can talk about those instead. But if you're ready to approve, I can give you a motion.
And just before we spend any time diving any details potentially, maybe just a quick little straw poll. Are we feeling generally that we're ready to move forward and vote on approving this? I'm going to put my hand up for yes. Looks like it. Okay. Did you have a motion or a comment, Commissioner Bailing?
I do. And I have some questions about the final order and a couple of issues that, again, some little wording issues. But I have a question also from the last session. I wasn't here, but I watched it. And I noticed at that one, Commissioner Beeson said he wanted to have more information on Goal 5 and Randy Lane. And I'd like to know if his concerns and questions were addressed. And then I can tell you about my other questions.
Okay, well, if you're asking me, I was having a little trouble hearing you. You're talking about the goal at the first meeting. There were some questions about Goal 5 and whether it was on the Goal 5 inventory and so on. And I think I talked to staff or asked them about their comfort with it. I got pretty satisfied with that, both through my own additional homework, and I also spent some time talking to staff. And I'm feeling pretty comfortable that in fact this particular property is part of their Goal 5 inventory and part of that referenced map. I don't have any remaining question about that. And I know it applies to a couple of the appeals issues, so I'm okay with it. If that's the question. Yeah.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So one of my questions about the final order, for some reason I wrote down page 8, but I wondered why in the final order it addresses each individual argument and testimony once it was stated that it was all allowed. Why address each one individually? That's
so Commissioner Veiling, as you'll probably recall, there were kind of two different evidentiary issues that the commission looked at. The first one was for the commission itself. Was there any testimony that came in after the hearings official had made her decision and before the record closed that either was new evidence, was something that the hearings official had not had a chance to look at, or that didn't that went beyond the scope of the appeal issues identified by the applicant? And Nick combed through the record and identified a few pieces of testimony where he thought that it was new evidence or outside the scope of the appeal issues. And Planning Commission walked through each of those pieces, and you determined whether or not to reject, not consider them because they're outside the scope of Planning Commission's authority in this particular appeal setting. So those are the listed pieces of testimony. Those are the pieces that you decided not to consider because they were outside the scope. Separately, there was an appeal issue that related to testimony submitted to the hearings official by the applicant back when the hearings official was considering the application. And that's what you decided to consider, that it should have been considered. And so that's what you have been considering as part of some of these appeal issues.
I understand, but that's what I'm asking about. Given we have, or we are stating that we consider that the testimony in the second period is responsive to the first open record as part of our decision, why after that would each individual argument have to be responded to? That's what I couldn't follow. It seems unnecessary wording if I'm reading it right.
I guess I'm not.
So if I may jump in to help clarify, Lauren, and I'll try to identify a page number. So within the draft final order, and this is perhaps a leftover, is a very detailed list that that Nick was so kind to produce for us. But beginning on this page 14 of the agenda, page 7 of the draft final order.
Yeah, 7 and 8.
We have bullets that list various close arguments about what was in his testimony that we should consider. And so one could say, oh, it's superfluous, it's in here, his letter. Another perspective might be, hey, this is a detailed way to walk through and articulate what it is what he argued and that we're considering it.
I apologize, Commissioner Bailing. I clearly misunderstood your question. The part of it is because it makes it very clear that the testimony that Planning Commission decided to consider is actually responsive to testimony that came in during that first open record period. So Nick kind of did the work for the Planning Commission and for anybody else who might review your decision later to say, here was the evidence and here's what it's responsive to. Here was the evidence and here's what it's responsive to. So that it's not the decision, like somebody who might be reviewing your decision doesn't have to take your word for it. It's very clear that you accepted it because it was responsive, and here's the thing it was responsive to.
All right. So I think that was the big question I had, and then a couple little smaller ones, like on page 25, there's a quote. Page 40, I don't know, page 25 or page 40, a quote of the, oh, it's making reference to the hearing official's decision. And it quotes 2 paragraphs. And then after the second paragraph of the hearing official's decision, the next paragraph in the order repeats almost verbatim what was in the hearing official's paragraph, the paragraph before. And I was like, I'm not sure we need it to be that that redundant. It was the hearing official and then our statement. And so it's things like that that I just tripped over a little bit. A lot of wording. There's a lot of wording in this. Yeah, so page 25 has this page 40 quote. And then after the quote, the content of the quote is just repeated again in the next paragraph. Something to look at.
Attempting to summarize it, but I can see how you might say it's redundant. Yeah, Nick.
I can share that if we want to look at that so we know what we're talking about. Do you want me to do that?
Page 25.
Well, at this point, I think we've already kind of had our straw poll on, where we're coming down on it. So unless Commissioner Bailing, you have any other questions or you want to add any motions on making any changes, maybe we'll go ahead and take a vote on this draft final order. Anything else, Commissioner Bailing?
No, it's fine. It's just different style, I guess.
Does someone want to make a motion?
Ooh, I can provide you. So a motion that Planning Commission could use would be move to approve the final order attached as attachment A to the February 18th, 2025 Planning Commission agenda item summary. And that was a lot to repeat back. So if somebody just wants to say so moved, you could do that too.
Commissioner Isaacson?
So moved.
Second. Looking for a second. Commissioner Ramey, thank you. All those in favor, if you want to put your hand up. And the decision is unanimous there. Well, want to commend fellow commissioners for dealing with a tough issue that definitely arises considerable passion. And we all undoubtedly have our own opinions on whether the subject is an appropriate fit, but our role here was much more limited than to be a decider on whether it's a objectively good idea or not, since we had a pretty narrow set of conditions under the law. So thanks also to staff for helping us with this very dense, complex topic, and to everybody who came out. That was an incredible amount of community participation, probably the most that I've seen since I've been on Planning Commission. Commissioner Bailing, did you have another question?
Yeah, one more little question. The final order makes reference to the H2 map and several other documents. Will those be attached to our final order as exhibits?
They will not. As it stands, the final order, and as you've recommended or approved it, we'll have the hearings official's decision as the only attachment. I want to clarify, though, that all of those maps, including H2, are a formal part of the record, and so they're baked into the record of materials that will go forward in in the event that anyone needs to find it or it goes to Luba or whatnot. It's all there.
Okay, so now that we have concluded our action on Braywood Hills land use appeal, we're on to the final item for our meeting, which is agenda items from commissioners and staff. Are there any items or info from commissioners that you would like to share before staff goes? Don't see any, so maybe Alyssa, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure, my list is really short. You have a meeting next Tuesday, so the 25th, and that's going to be on the city's capital improvement program. I don't think that will take the full 2 hours either. Just giving you a heads up on that. And then currently we have no agenda items for March. There's a really good chance that both of those meetings will be canceled, but we'll let you know that next week. And we're still figuring out agenda items for the months following that. So more to come on those, but hold your second and fourth Tuesdays open for now, and we'll let you know which ones you can fill up.
Any other items from staff? Thank you all. This meeting of the Eugene Planning Commission is now adjourned. Hope everyone has a great rest of your week. Look forward to seeing you all again soon.